All right, welcome back everybody. We're here to do another video on Turo, and this is probably one of the sides of Turo that you won't hear about as often, about some of the bad renters. I know there are a lot of questions when I post on Twitter or elsewhere, I talk to other people. A lot of the concern is usually how the renters take care of your car, and from my experience personally, it's been very positive. There's only been one really negative trip I've had, and that was one that I didn't necessarily follow my intuition. We're pretty early on having our truck listed on the platform, and I at that point was more inclined to get renters as opposed to be declining any trips at that point. And even though that was one that I had the gut feeling once the trip got booked, I still went through with it. And it's one of the lessons you learn along the way, and I'm just fortunate that nothing catastrophic happened to our car, but there were some negatives that went along with that. And so that's what I was going to talk about today. That trip was back in October. It was a 5-day trip, October 12th to October 17th. It got booked late in the evening by a guy named Richard. He had no previous rentals, which if you haven't rented or haven't hosted on the platform before, it's really nice when a previous renter books your car, because then you kind of have at least some base of judgment moving forward. So basically, you know, if they got a bunch of 5-star reviews, you could be pretty comfortable that they're going to get another 5-star. However, you got a renter who's got 3 stars, 2 stars on previous trips, maybe a 4 mixed in there. You're obviously going to be a little more apprehensive that they're not going to take as good a care as your car. And that was one of the situations that happened here. Was the renter, he had no bookings, no previous trips, and he had basically just created his profile that month. Those are kind of 2 red flags I look for now that I've had the experiences. If it's a new profile, granted there's people hopping on Turo all the time, so there's going to be great renters who, they need their first trip eventually. So that's not necessarily a clear indicator of like, yes, this could be an issue, but that is something to look out for. Is if they had just recently started their profile, probably won't have any trips. At that point, it's kind of a crapshoot. But there are a couple things that you can look for to maybe mitigate your risk. Let's put it that way. So as I was saying, this guy rented our truck late at night. I don't remember what time in the evening it was, but it was after 8 o'clock. I was upstairs and get a booking request from October 12th to the 17th by a guy. He was a local renter, which to me, and you may hear from other hosts, that usually is a red flag. I like people who are coming from out of town. I don't want anybody local really renting the truck. That's why I have minimums for days. Normally, during peak season, it's about 3 days minimum trip, and during the off season in our area, I'll usually drop it down to 2 just to see if I can get some a couple more bookings. But I would strongly advise against the 1-day rentals, because then that's when you're going to get some locals, and I would just much rather have out of town people, because it's usually people coming in from vacation, coming up to see Lake Tahoe, maybe coming up to Reno for a convention, something along those lines. So that's just kind of food for thought if you're thinking about hosting, or if you already are hosting, just some of the changes that I would probably look into to try and best protect yourself from getting a potentially bad renter. But I'll go into the story. So rented it late in the evening. I was excited because we were early in the process, and I was trying to get as many bookings as I could. The trip was going to be about $432 roughly, and so good amount of money for that trip at the time. And basically what happened was he had picked up at our home location as opposed to the airport. So that's another clear indicator of most likely going to be a local renter. People from out of town are predominantly going to want to pick it up at the airport. They're not going to want to have to get out of the airport, take an Uber to your home location and get the truck there. They're going to want it right when they get out of the terminal. So picked it up at our house, brand new profile, no previous trips, local. Those were all kind of like, moving forward, those are red flags that I'm looking for. Those aren't exact automatic no's now, but those are things that I'm definitely more hypersensitive to. Profile picture was a little funky. It just wasn't a really clear picture of him. It almost looked like it was just some random picture that they had grabbed somewhere and uploaded. Now, however, the trip was Turo Go, And if you don't know, Turo Go basically means that you don't need to verify the driver when they pick it up. Their license is verified through the platform before the trip starts. So it's kind of one of those contactless delivery type things. Not everybody's able to do Turo Go, but if you have a certain car, and I think if you're an all-star host, then you're eligible for Turo Go. But so once he had booked it, I confirmed with him, hey, I want to make sure you're picking it up here at this time. The communication wasn't great. Normally that's another indicator is, if they're being clear, responding quickly, not kind of being short with you, those are usually pretty good signs. Now this guy was not. His communication was kind of lacking, wasn't really being straightforward with me, and then just kind of was being pretty short, to put it that way. Just, I need it for this point, da 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 da. And a lot of times when you get out of town people, it's, especially once they book it, it's, hey, I'm excited to rent your truck, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to use it for this thing, hope everything's great, whatever. And that's normally how it goes. I'd say about 99% of my trips that are from out of towners, that's kind of the playbook of what they're typing out. And this just wasn't really the case. On the trip, because he had booked it for 5 days, he was allowed 1,250 miles. And this is something I tweet about frequently. Normally, the location we're at, people are either kind of putting around Reno when they have the truck, or they're driving up to the lake, which means that the majority of the miles will be used while they're driving up there, and then when they're driving back. A lot of the time, Lake Tahoe, it's a big area. If you drive from north to south, south to north, you can add some miles on, but for the large majority of it, people are usually kind of staying in the part of the lake that they're staying at. So, like, for example, we have a trip going on right now. The guest is allowed, I think it was 1,700 miles, and they have thus far driven, I think, 260, and they're dropping the truck off tomorrow. So it really depends, but that's generally the case in the area, is that people are not pushing the mileage limits, just in general. This guy, however, he was allowed, 1,250. When he dropped the truck off, it was 1,977 miles he had driven in that 5 day span. So he had 727 miles over the limit. And yes, Turo does charge the guests per mile they go over. So at the time, our truck was it usually gets somewhere between 40 to 50 cents a mile. But 700 miles over is pretty substantial. The guy drove almost 2,000 miles in that short trip, which, you put 2,000 miles on a car in 5 days. That's a lot of driving. So that was also another issue. I'm normally not as concerned with the mileage, like I was talking about how the average renter keeps it pretty well below. But this guy obviously went the other route. Another thing that a lot of hosts have is some sort of tracker on the car. It's not like we're not, as big as rental car companies. And so basically, if you rented a car from Hertz and wrecked it, wouldn't be as big of an issue for them. But if you are renting from a host that has 1 to 3, 4 cars, maybe, depending on how much money that car brings in, if that car goes down for a while, that can really hurt the cash flow part of the process. And it was just, so one thing, basically, it's that I'm just getting at why a lot of hosts have trackers on their car, because car gets stolen, whatever happens to it, you want to be able to locate the car. Even if there's a major issue, got stolen, dropped off somewhere, you want to be able to locate where that truck's at. And so a lot of people use the app Bouncy, or the system Bouncy. It's basically a plug-in software to your car that has GPS tracking into it. But for us, we have the Ford navigation system, which has a GPS tracker on it. So it's one of those things that's usually, I'll check it to make sure the guest picked up the truck, and then when they drop it off, make sure it's in the right area. I don't really like being too nosy during the trip. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, it's not really into my business of where you're going with the car. I just want to be able to make sure that you picked it up and make sure that it's at the right spot when you drop it off. Because there are some other nightmare stories of airport drop-offs and people leaving it at the drop-off section, and just, cars getting towed. So I try to avoid that. Now, however, this guy, when he picked up the truck, the first thing he did was shut off the navigation system. So I had no clue at that point where the truck would be anywhere during the 5 days, which, isn't, to me, it wasn't like a major, like, oh, I need to know where the truck's at. It was more of like this person has thought it out and went into the system and shut that off. And so to me, it's like, okay, they know that navigation system will let me know where they're at. And for whatever reason, they didn't want me knowing where they were going, which is another just major red flag at that point. A lot of times guests, if they, figure you have some sort of tracker, or maybe some people a lot of hosts put it in the ad, for their car, hey, I have a tracker or whatever. They may ask about it, but to basically just go that route and just shut it off and not mention anything about it, that to me was like, all right, another red flag. So at that point, they had the truck, navigation was turned off. I knew it was a local renter. It was just kind of, at that point, it was like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen with my truck? When they came back, a couple things. They dropped it off late at night. They had to extend, I think, once or twice because they weren't going to drop it off at the right time. And per Turo's, coverage policy, you need to make sure that by the time they drop the car off, their trip has, the trip time exceeds that. So, meaning if they drop the truck off at 10:30 at night, the trip needs to end at 10:30 or later. You get into some coverage issues with Turo if, say, your trip ends at 8 p.m. and they drop the truck off at 10:30 or 11 o'clock, because basically they have a couple hours where they're not technically covered by Turo's coverage. And so that's just another big issue. So luckily this guy, in that regard, he was extending the trip, he's pushing it back to make sure that the coverage was good. So at that point I was like, okay, I was fairly confident our truck was coming back, but at that point I just had no idea the condition. Once the truck came back, he dropped it off, didn't say anything. Basically, I go see the truck. I mean, one thing, it's kind of a picky thing, but it was parked horribly where the truck pickup and drop off location is near our house. So that was kind of like, in my mind, was thinking, okay, they were trying to get out of here in a hurry before I came out. I flicked the truck on, and immediately the truck just reeked of cigarettes. It smelled like it had been chain smoked in since they picked it up. It was awful. And then as I start inspecting around, there's cigarette ash all over the place, a couple cigarettes. There were some weird things, like there was a couple like fingernails, like women's fingernails in the car, and the truck was just trashed on the inside. It smelled horrible. Then as I flick the truck on, the gas tank is nearly empty. And Turo's pretty good about, if they leave it empty and they picked it up full, about getting that reimbursed, and you can charge them, I think it's like a $10 convenience fee to refill it. That usually isn't really like a major concern of mine if a guest leaves it, brings it back empty, because it's better to have them fill it up. But extra $10, whatever, if they take good care of the truck, at that point it's not a big deal. But with all these pieces coming up with the weird local stuff, the picking it up late in the evening, the turning the navigation off, all these things were just kind of lining up, and did not feel great about it. And luckily, going through Turo, I was able to have enough evidence to get the smoking reimbursement, which is about $250. Had the extra mileage, had the gas. So the trip itself ended up being about $1,094 total. So originally $432, ended up cashing out almost $1,100. So cash flow perspective, great trip. Almost triple the price of what the original booking was for. However, I did have to buy an ozone machine, which was probably a good investment to have in the business anyways, to kind of help filter out the smoke smell, fill up the tank. I was honestly more concerned that they had stolen like the Cadillac converter of the truck. Went under that was fine. But it's just one of the parts of Turo that, if you can see these red flags and just follow your intuition, a lot of times you can save yourself the hassle of these types of renters. Now looking forward to where we are in the process, I would much rather just cancel that trip, have the truck sit, as opposed to just some of the stress that goes along with that, just knowing like, hey, I may never see the truck again. On top of that, I forgot to mention the truck came back completely dirty on the exterior, like disgust. I wish I had a picture to share of the front of the truck. It looked like they had driven through just a tornado of these bugs. They were monster sized, but not any bugs that we have anywhere near the Reno area. It was insane how covered the truck was. I had to take it through a car wash, and then also I had to hand scrub that thing for almost an hour to get everything cleaned up off the grill of the truck. It was pretty gnarly. I've never seen a car that dirty in the front. But long story short, with Turo, you're gonna have some of these issues, and as long as you can identify some of the potential problems with renters, like I was talking about, new profile, what are their ratings, how good's the communication, are they local, some of those things, then you can really limit some of the potential for a problem. And it's just one of those things that you're going to learn as you go along. Initially on, like I mentioned, I was just trying to get as many bookings as I could. But it's just one of those things that you learn as part of the process, and you just, once you know it's been a bad trip, you learn from it, and you hope that, you know, the ones moving forward, you don't have those issues anymore. But it's inevitable. Eventually you're going to run into a bad renter. Not everybody's going to be perfect. And it's the golden rule of Turo is nobody is going to take as good of care as your car as you would. So it's just part of the process. That is my story with my one bad renter so far. So I consider myself very lucky as a host that that's been it. And now moving forward, I just kind of take some of those lessons to, you know, kind of vet out some potential renters to make sure that, nobody who may not treat the car in the manner that they should ends up getting the truck for a certain period of time. But that's the one bad story I have. If you'd like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I got more Turo stories coming along the way and more Turo advice. I do have a Twitter account as well where I'm tweeting about Turo pretty frequently and any other side hustles as well. And so I appreciate the support. Drop a comment below if you have any other questions about the trip or any other things with maybe potential renter vetting or anything along those lines. I'd be happy to answer them for you. And we'll see you in the next video.